1 Brooklyn, 2 private schools. The first mystery, WAS Jeffrey Edward Epstein, was born on January 20, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. He didn't come from inherited Wall Street power. His background was modest, no dynasty, no famous last name that should have carried him into elite rooms. And yet, early on, Epstein showed a pattern that would define his whole life. He found pathways into high-status environments, even when he didn't belong there on paper. He attended Lafayette High School and later took courses at Cooper Union and New York University. But he did not graduate, the fact that becomes important because of what happens next. Despite not having a completed degree, Epstein ended up teaching at the Dalton School, an expensive private school in Manhattan, attended by children from powerful and wealthy families. That job wasn't just employment, it was a launchpad into a social ecosystem where introductions can become fortunes. Even in that early phase, there were later claims reported by multiple outlets over the years that Epstein's boundaries around young people were questionable. Some former students described discomfort. Whether those early accounts were ever pursued properly is unclear. But what matters is this: Epstein's access to privilege began early and it kept expanding. To Bear Stearns and the Who Is This Guy? PROB. Lim. In the mid to late 1970s, Epstein moved into finance and worked at Bear Stearns, rising far beyond what most people would expect for someone without a traditional resume. Over time, he developed relationships with wealthy clients and learned exactly what the rich value most. Not morality, not loyalty, not transparency. They value results, secrecy, and problem solving, especially when it involves money. Eventually, Epstein left Bear Stearns. Different accounts exist about the exact circumstances, but what's consistent is that Epstein didn't disappear after leaving the firm. He kept floating in the same universe. And then comes one of the biggest practical mysteries of the entire Epstein story. Where, exactly, did his fortune come from? Because Epstein lived like a billionaire, moved like a political broker, and acquired properties that made him look untouchable. But the publicly documented details of how he built and maintained that level of wealth have always been incomplete and contested. 3. The Wexner era. Power of attorney, power of EVR, White Hing. One of the most documented relationships in Epstein's financial life was with Leslie Wexner, the billionaire behind L Brands, associated for decades with major retail empires. At one point, Epstein was not just advising Wexner, he was reportedly granted extraordinary financial authority, including a level of control that raised eyebrows when it became public later. This relationship mattered for one reason. Above all, Wexner's circle wasn't just wealthy, it was connected. And once Epstein had a reputation as someone who could manage wealth and move comfortably among elites, the social doors opened wider. New York Palm Beach private dinners, private planes, and the kind of introductions that create permanent shields. For the system prosecutors described, recruitment, cash, and CO on terror. Here's what federal prosecutors alleged years later. In the early 2000s, particularly 2002 to 2005 in key filings, Epstein abused minors and used a system where some victims were allegedly paid to recruit other victims. This is one of the darkest mechanics in trafficking cases, turning vulnerable people into links in the chain. The allegations include recruitment of underage girls, payments in cash, grooming, and a structure involving employees or associates who helped manage scheduling and access. This isn't presented as a single incident. It's described as a pattern. And what makes the Epstein case uniquely explosive is not only what prosecutors said he did, but how long he allegedly did it, and how many opportunities there were to stop it sooner. 5. Palm Beach, 2005. The first crack in the wall in Palm Beach, Florida. Local law enforcement began investigating Epstein after complaints involving a minor. Over time, more accounts emerged, and the story began to take shape. A wealthy man using his property, money, and influence to create an environment where victims felt powerless and where reporting him felt pointless. This phase matters because it leads to one of the most criticized outcomes in modern criminal justice. The 2007-2008 deal. 6. The deal that shocked the public. 2007-2008. Epstein ultimately entered a Florida case resolution that became infamous because it was widely seen as remarkably lenient compared to the scale of allegations. He pleaded guilty to state charges and served time, but under conditions that critics argued looked less like punishment and more like a protected routine. One of the most controversial elements, reported and debated for, years was how that agreement affected potential accountability around other people in Epstein's orbit. The lasting damage of this era wasn't only legal, it was psychological, because when a powerful suspect survives a major investigation with limited consequences, victims everywhere absorb a message: if he can walk through that, who will ever believe me? 7/2019. The second arrest and the feeling that this time was different. In July 2019, Epstein was arrested again, this time by federal authorities in New York. This moment felt like a major reset. The perception was, no more local deals, no more soft exits, no more special rules. Epstein sought release, but a judge denied bail. He was detained at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Manhattan, one of the most secure detention facilities in the federal system. And then something happened that changed the case forever. Epstein died on August 10, 2019, in federal custody. The official finding was suicide, but almost immediately, the public reaction split into two storms. Storm 1. Even if it was suicide, how did the system allow it? Storm 2. Was it really suicide? Years later, the U.S. Department of Justice's Inspector General released findings describing severe failures at MCC: staffing shortages, missed checks, and documentation problems. The report described an environment where basic protocols were not followed, and where the facility was struggling structurally. That report became crucial because it reinforced what many people already suspected. Even without a conspiracy, the conditions were dangerously broken. And when you combine broken conditions with a prisoner who had enormous exposure, risks someone whose testimony could affect powerful people, the suspicion becomes permanent. After Epstein's death, federal prosecutors said investigations could continue into co-conspirators. One central figure was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was later convicted for her role in recruiting and grooming underage girls for Epstein and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Her case matters because it confirms through a jury verdict that Epstein did not operate as a solo monster in isolation. There were mechanisms, there were facilitators, there were systems of access. And yet, for the public, the central hunger remained. Who else? Over the years, documents related to Epstein surfaced through court proceedings, especially civil litigation. In early 2024, additional materials were unsealed in connection with litigation involving Epstein and Maxwell, including names of public figures mentioned in testimony. But it's as critical to understand what that means. A name in a document is not the same as proof of a crime. A contact in an address book is not the same as a client. A mention in a deposition is not the same as a conviction. Even Reuters has reported that the Justice Department has stated there is no verified client list in the mythical sense people imagine online. That doesn't mean there aren't unanswered questions. It means the case is messy in a very specific way. Epstein surrounded himself with powerful people, sometimes for money, sometimes for influence, sometimes because that's how he built protection, and that creates a permanent fog where rumors breed faster than evidence. Legally, Epstein's criminal case ended when he died. Maxwell was convicted. But culturally and emotionally this case remains unresolved for several reasons. First, Epstein's death removed the possibility of a full public trial, where testimony could have been tested under oath. Second, the early Florida resolution left the public believing the justice system can be bent when the defendant is rich enough. Third, the jail failures created a permanent suspicion that the ending was not natural even if the official conclusion says it was. Fourth, the scale of alleged victimization created a sense that accountability can never be complete, because many victims may never come forward. And fifth, Epstein's finances remain one of the most uncomfortable mysteries. A man with unclear wealth origins living at a level that made him effectively bulletproof, till he wasn't. If you strip away the headlines and focus on the mechanics, Epstein survived because the system had vulnerabilities and he exploited every single one of them. Social access to elite circles, money to buy silence and services, cash payments that reduce traces, victim vulnerability, institutional hesitation, and a world where influential people often prefer a quiet fix over a loud truth. And then, when the truth finally got close enough to force answers, the story stopped in a cell. Jeffrey Epstein is gone, but the damage isn't. The victims live with it, the questions live with it, and the public distrust created by the way this case unfolded is now part of modern history. So I'll leave you with the same question that refuses to die. Was Epstein's death simply the final act of a man who couldn't face consequences, or the moment someone somewhere, decided that the truth was too dangerous to reach a courtroom. Write your theory in the comments, but keep it respectful. Remember, behind every headline are real victims who didn't get to choose any of this. If you want more deep dives like this, like the video, subscribe to Unsolved Crime, and turn on notifications because the next case is already waiting. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.